So hello there and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 Podcast, the show where we take all of the latest gossip, news and events in the world of Formula 1 and relay that back to you for a bit of healthy banter and discussion for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending of course on which platform you choose to follow us on. And guys, we have just had an absolute barnstormer of a Grand Prix at the Brazilian Grand Prix where, against all of the odds, Lewis Hamilton managed to get an incredibly crucial win and an incredible performance from the seven-time F1 world champion, arguably his greatest performance this season and certainly up there with one of the best ones he has done in his career. And of course, as always, we are going to dissect this one and get right into it as it's the best place to do so. And of course, I am joined by a couple of guests, two guests that not really familiar with the show. Of course, we've had one of our guests that's been on a few times, more of a footballing background, if you like, but they're certainly going to lend us their expertise on the Formula 1 events that went down this weekend. And joining us, of course, our two guests are from the 1892 Reds podcast, Liverpool fans, a Liverpool-based podcast. If you love your football and love Liverpool Football Club, I definitely recommend checking those guys out, and we'll leave the link in the descriptions below. But without further ado, it's Luke and Ricky. Guys, thank you for coming on the show. I'm really glad to have you on. First of all, Luke, how are you doing this evening? You okay?
Yeah, I'm all good, Adam. Thanks for letting me come back on. I think it's my hat-trick appearance, coming on the podcast. But yeah, it was a very good race today. And obviously, definitely we're going to be talking about what's the impact for the last three races to come with that result today.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have any match balls, I'm afraid, that I can give you for a hat-trick appearance. Unfortunately, we're not that kind of show. Maybe a bit more budget in the future might be able to. But of course, joining us, a guest I'm very much looking forward to having on the show. It's Rick from the 1892 Reds podcast as well. Rick, thanks for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm not doing too bad, thank you, and appreciate you getting me on for my views on that massive race that just finished.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, let's get right into it. Now, the big headline, of course, Lewis Hamilton getting his first win since Sochi and arguably one of the best ones of the season. It was an incredible Grand Prix, so much drama, so much action on and off the track, of course, dominated heavily by the controversy over Lewis Hamilton getting disqualified, of course, from the sprint qualifying session, I should say, not the race, demoting him to the back of the grid. And of course, we're going to get into the sprint race momentarily because, of course, the headline is the main race. But first things first, guys, Lewis Hamilton winning the Grand Prix, starting 10th on the grid after an additional 5-place grid penalty for a change of engine, managed to come through the field rather quickly up into second place almost immediately for a race-long battle with Max Verstappen. And on this occasion, they didn't come together, fortunately, but it was very, very close indeed. But it was Lewis who managed to get the better of his rival to get a crucial win, which now reduces the gap between them to 14 points, of course, in Max Verstappen's favour. Now, Luke, of course, first things first, the race as a whole, so many points that we can pick and choose from. But I think what was rather telling this weekend was how blisteringly quick Lewis Hamilton was. Of course, having the new power unit in his car, the Mercedes looked to be the stronger car by some margin around this circuit. But you add that up with Lewis Hamilton's brilliance, you get what you saw this weekend. I mean, how incredible was that performance from Lewis Hamilton this weekend as a whole?
I think if you just got to take it as you see it. I think at the end of the day, if you love him or hate him, he is definitely one of the greatest drivers of all time, and he's proved it this weekend. The race itself, it was just the straight line speed that Mercedes had, especially with him today, was just frightening. Going in the remaining races of the season, you see that Red Bull would have the upper advantage after the race last week in Mexico. You didn't really think that Lewis would have an answer really for Max because of the strategy today. It could have worked for him. You see in America as well that Lewis struggled a little bit with that straight line speed to get close to Max at times. But today he shows why, he's the best of the generation that we're in right now. The straight lines, as I said, the straight line speed was just incredible. That new engine's definitely helped him, and that result today, it's just small, fine margins. I mean, if he comes second in that race, then he's effectively a race down going into the last three races of the season and the championship. But he's got the extra 7 points from today, and it's definitely, turned this season on its head again, which has been, in my opinion, probably one of the best seasons that I've ever seen from a Formula One championship.
Yeah, absolutely right. And of course, it's important to note that straight line performance that Lewis Hamilton seemed to have above practically almost anybody else in the race, including his own teammate, of course, who was running an older power unit, although not as old as others, because he's had a few engine penalties himself this season, most notably. But Red Bull, they do seem quite convinced that there's something going on with that Mercedes car that perhaps in their minds isn't quite compliant with the regulations. Of course, we saw a lot of that this weekend, not necessarily with the DRS issue, but a separate issue altogether that Red Bull were looking into. I'm sure we'll find out the truth or find out what's been going on. But until then, of course, we can't take anything away from what Hamilton and Mercedes have done this weekend, because it was absolutely incredible. But in your mind, Luke, how crucial was this win for Lewis Hamilton today? Because, of course, as you mentioned, if Max Verstappen was to get the win this weekend, which a lot of us, including myself, thought he might do, it probably would have been game over for Lewis at this point.
I mean, that's the thing, as you said, before the start of this race, I mean, after the sprint race, it went up to, 21 points? I mean, Max already gained 2 points in the sprint race, and, Lewis did everything possible he did to get himself in the position he was in today. I mean, if it goes the other way around, it would have been 28 points. So it's, it's just little fine margins that, will make or break who's going to win the championship. I mean, we just don't know what's going to happen over these next 3 races. Which, as you said, we've seen in some races in the past where, I think you take France, for example, we expect Mercedes to win, but Red Bull picked up the victory. It's just, we just don't know what's going to happen. But it's a massive win for Lewis today because, as you said, Adam, if he comes second, then obviously he's got a massive mountain to climb in them last 3 races. But for the neutral point of view, irrelevant if you support Max or Lewis, I mean, as I said before, what a championship it's been this season.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It does seem that this could be, I think this is probably the first time this season, I think we've seen a defiant performance from Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes collectively, where there's not just a genuine belief in them as an entity and as a group that they can come together and still win this championship, but it could be a win that could strike fear into their rivals at Red Bull and Max Verstappen respectively, that perhaps, Mercedes could do this, Hamilton could do this. There's a combination there that certainly could pull this together, and on the basis of what we saw this weekend, there's absolutely no reason to believe that Hamilton can't pull this together at the very last moment and win this championship, as unlikely as it has been this season. Ricky, I'll come to you and bring you into the conversation as well. Obviously, you've been very, very vocal in the sort of WhatsApp group over Lewis's performance this weekend. I mean, how shocked were you with how impressive Lewis Hamilton was this weekend, or were you even surprised at all that he was able to pull it off?
I mean, I think the fans, the teams, are all still waiting for the FIA to actually turn up to the race and officiate it. I mean, they're probably still trying to find the reason not to give Lewis the win. What he's had to go through this weekend just to win this race, get closer to Max in the championship, could have put someone in a position where they thought, let's give up on this weekend. It ain't going to be our weekend. We move on to the next. He absolutely killed everyone and then back straight with the speed of the car. Me personally, I think that new engine they've got will win him the championship this season. I just think he's too quick. Red Bull, you see the interview after the race with Christian Horner, he looks a worried man. I think they asked him a question if he's going to protest Mercedes' car at the end of the season, depending on what happens. So it's going to be interesting last 3 races. I think Hamilton goes into the next race as a favourite purely because there's a lot of straights and they seem to be the quicker car in that. But you can't take nothing away from Max. He's a good driver. I just think Lewis is levelled above him and will go on to win it this season.
Very, very bold claim. But of course, based on what we've seen this weekend, if the form book does continue with that trend, then who's to say that, that is certainly out of the question. It certainly doesn't look that way. I mean, after the Mexican Grand Prix, of course, we saw Max Verstappen, as we kind of expected, put together a strong, dominant performance with pace in hand. We go to Brazil, a track that it did seem to suit the Mercedes more than most, and Lewis Hamilton emphatically responded in the most amazing way possible, in the way that only really Lewis Hamilton can, fighting his way through the field. I mean, for me, it just seems that when Lewis Hamilton is fighting through the field when he has to. He has this unique ability that very, very few F1 drivers of the past have. I'm talking people like Schumacher, people like Senna, Lauda, some of the real greats of F1 history have this unique ability to fight their way through the field and just put together a performance like we saw today. And the question will remain, can Max Verstappen respond in the remaining races? The question will be, after what Max threw at Lewis today to try and keep him behind it, how much of a confidence dent do you think Max Verstappen may have suffered this weekend, only getting in P2, despite what Lewis had to go through to get that win? And do you think that might follow him for the rest of the season?
I think Max knows he hasn't got the pace to compete with Lewis on a back straight, so if it comes down to that. So he needs to be at the DRS system so that Lewis can't use that to gain additional pace on him as well. I think he's rattled Max. You've got him touching Lewis's car at the end of the sprint. You've got he looks worried, and he's a young driver. I do think he will bottle it, and I think Lewis's experience will take him over the line with the quickness of the car. I just think the pressure will get to Max, and Christian Horner's not a stable man, so I just think he will make Max even more nervous going into the final three races.
No, fair enough. Luke, obviously, do you want to weigh in on this one? Do you think Max Verstappen is starting to feel the pressure? Because, we're talking about a guy this season that has been completely mentally, for the most part, pretty solid. We haven't really seen Max rattled at all this season, but perhaps this could be the first time this season where some doubts might start to creep in Max's mind and thinking, there is a chance I might not win this.
If you're looking at this week's performance, of course, Lewis will definitely add to the next race confidence. But we see that last week in Mexico, Max was dominant. He was going into this weekend dominant. So you never know. It could swing again. This is how this season's been. It's just been swings and roundabouts. 1 week, Lewis leads the championship, then it's Max, then it's Lewis, then back to Max. I don't personally think that Max will be overly concerned at the moment. He's got the lead in the championship. He's got a 14-point lead. That's a good lead to have with 3 races to go. Red Bull, maybe not Max particularly, but Red Bull have been in this situation before with the likes of Vettel. They will know how to manage Max Verstappen in this position. But of course, you can't take away the fact that Max Verstappen is competing against, as I said before, probably the best driver in our generation, if not, one of the greatest of all time. That is obviously a debate for another day who's the greatest or not. But at the end of the day, I don't think Max will be overly too concerned just yet. I think he's defined a lot of odds compared to what he has done in recent races, regarding, the French Grand Prix wasn't supposed to win. The American Grand Prix wasn't supposed to win. Yes, I do believe he could be under a bit of pressure, as well as Lewis, because I think Lewis is under a bit more pressure than Max at the moment. And that's why I think he's actually started to deliver more on the races that, we obviously expect Lewis to deliver. But, the Qatar Grand Prix next week, anything can happen. It's just amazing to see this season. As I said before, if you're a Max or Lewis fan, what a championship we've had. The last 3 races are definitely going to be a spectacle to see who is under the most pressure to crumble at the end.
Yeah, very much so. And it could prove to be who blinks last, or who makes the first mistake between the two of them in this position. It could be the deciding factor. Let's get into the race, of course. Now, we had the sprint race where Lewis pretty much siphoned his way through the entire field, all the way up into P5. Admittedly, I thought in going into this main race that Lewis had to get the start right, because if he didn't, and he found himself 10, 15, 20 seconds off the leaders, he'd have a hard time trying to claw that back for the rest of the race. But of course, he managed to get that brilliant start, managed to make up a few places, was helped a little bit by the fact that Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz came together briefly, which of course ruined Norris's race, and it made the job a bit easier for Lewis. But, Lewis aside for a second, Max Verstappen, of course, starting P2, and it was important for him to reverse what happened in the sprint race where Bottas overtook him at the start, albeit he was on the softer tyres, Max was on the mediums, so he had a much better tyre advantage off the line. But Max Verstappen, of course, got a very good start, got alongside Bottas into turn 1, and was quite aggressive into turn 1 to the point where he was, I wouldn't say forcing, but Valtteri did have to try and get out of it because he was forced as wide as possible, almost a little bit off the track. How did you see that overtake? Do you think that was a good move from Max, a very strong, aggressive one? Or do you think perhaps, Valtteri may have been warranting a bit more room on the outside?
I personally believe in that situation, they both had a similar start. Well, Max was slightly better, but you see in the sprint race, like Bottas got a great getaway. He wasn't as close as that, but I think that's probably as far as you can go to push the limit. I do think that Max had position at that point. I think Bottas maybe could have conceded a bit more because I don't think he was going to get in front of Max after that start that Max had. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. I do think that Max there's obviously been a lot of controversy about the way he drives and the way he's aggressive in turns, but I think if you look at apart from the Italian Grand Prix, for example, I do think he's learned a lot from that situation. And this is what we want to see. We want to see some aggressive but obviously fair racing at the same time. And in that situation, I think Max was as fair as possible until that, sort of furthest point along to where Bottas, in the end of it, just had to give up and move on because in the end of it, it nearly ruined his race because the next part of it, obviously, Perez overtook him. So, yeah, I don't think there was anything wrong with that position, to be honest with Max. I think he done everything he needed to do.
Yeah, it did seem that way for me. I thought Max was, he was aggressive. He had to get into the lead. I think Bottas did try to hang it around the outside to try and make it as hard as possible for Max. And when you do that, especially at Brazil at turn 1, you're going to run the risk where you're going to get forced out wide. I remember a similar incident between Montoya and Michael Schumacher that we do often see a lot back in 2001, where Montoya went up the inside of Michael at turn 1. Michael tried to hang it around the outside for as long as possible, and he just got forced off. And to be fair, the prerogative tends to go, or the priority tends to go with the driver on the inside line. You do run that risk at turn 1 like that, the way it comes in with the center S's. So I thought it was a fine move from Max Verstappen to get the lead. It had to be done. The last thing he wanted was for Bottas to bog him down like he did in the sprint race and give Hamilton an opportunity to get at Max as early as possible for a potential Mercedes 1-2. It did feel that, given the straight line speed Mercedes had at Sao Paulo, it probably would have been almost impossible for Red Bull, even with DRS assistance, to overtake them. That being said, of course, we had a nice little battle between Perez and Bottas, of course, for P2. And until we go further into the race, I want to talk briefly about the role that these two played today. Rick, it seems that both Bottas and Perez this weekend, I think both their teams will be rather satisfied with their performance, given that they were right up there with their teammates at least 10 seconds or no more than that behind them. And when they had to, they did the job for their teammates.
Yeah, I said to Luke in the WhatsApp that I thought Bottas could have done a bit more at the start in regards to... He basically got bullied at the start by both Red Bulls in the first corner. He done a job later on in the race to sort of get Lewis up there into first place and sort of hold off. When he was sitting in third place, he sort of held off Perez so that he'd give Lewis Hamilton a chance to go at Max without worrying who's behind him. He seemed like he was a bit frustrated with the strategy they were going at. He thought they could have got a 1-2 with just a one stop. I don't think you can go a one stop in that race with the heat on them tyres. But yeah, Red Bull really can't complain with how Perez done. He done what he needed to do. He got the fastest lap at the end to stop Max getting 4 points. So yeah, it was a good battle between the number 2 drivers, respectively, in both the top 2 in F1. So yeah, no, it was interesting. I just thought Bottas could have done more at the start to make it a little bit easier for Lewis to get in front early on.
Yeah, he certainly tried. I mean, they were looking at the reaction times for both drivers, and Bottas did get away quicker than Max, but it's that second phase where the Red Bull, particularly under Max, tends to bite a little bit better than the Mercedes does. And of course, yesterday was an exception because Bottas's tyres obviously had softer compound tyres on. That's why Carlos Sainz managed to get ahead of Max by the end of turn 4. But yeah, I can understand that. I think, Bottas did a good job today. He was as good as he was, to try and put some pressure on Max at the end. But, unlike Lewis, he just didn't really have the pace altogether. I think Max and Lewis are in a complete league of their own right now. So it would take something pretty special to beat either of them, even in their own machinery. As we can see, only them two seem to be capable of doing it. And, he did inherit that P3 on the basis of that safety car, which of course gave him that cheaper pit stop, if you like, as Martin Brundle said, which allowed him to overtake Perez. It did seem that Bottas did have the pace, though, possibly to beat Checo Perez today. On the subject of Perez, though, Luke, I think it's important to note that at the last 4 races, Red Bull have needed him to step up. He's got 3 podiums in a row, and he also got a P4 today. He probably could have been a podium today, but a P4, and he crucially took that fastest lap point away from Lewis Hamilton. So, given the fact that there's been a lot of pressure on Perez to up his performance, especially in qualifying, would you say in the last 4 races or so, Red Bull would be really satisfied with what he's been doing?
I generally think over the last, 6 to 7 years, we've not seen a Red Bull number 2 driver be able to step up like what Perez has done over the this season. I think the first half of the season was a bit slow, but definitely second half of this season, Sergio Perez has definitely been able to try and help Max as best as possible. As you said, the 3 podiums in a row, he's got a 4th place today, probably the best that he could get. And crucially, as you said, Adam, he's taken a point away off of Lewis Hamilton today. I mean, I believe it's going to go down to the final race of the season, who's going to win this championship. And I said to you before, there could be a situation where Max could be leading the championship by a point, or, Lewis could be winning the championship by a point as things would stand during the race, and Red Bull could be in a position where let's bring Perez in for the fastest lap. We could be going down to a championship finale where it could be down to the number 2s on the fastest lap points. I mean, that's just how crucial they've been over the last few races. And as you said, the subject of Perez, he's definitely been up there as one of the best drivers of the last 3 to 5 races because of his consistency and his teamwork alongside Max. And he continues this great work that he's doing, and Red Bull should fancy every chance that they can win this championship. But on the flip side, Bottas, obviously there's that little, duel between those two, who's going to finish 3rd in the championship. I do think Bottas has probably got enough, to get that 3rd place in the championship. But again, he's going to want to go out on a high with Mercedes, like win the Constructors' Championship, but obviously, of course, help Lewis win the championship. So it's definitely spicing up, not just between Max and Lewis, but obviously with Valtteri and Checo Perez, it's definitely spicing up with the last 3 races.
Yeah, it absolutely seems that way. I mean, we could find ourselves in a situation, as you were alluding to there, that we end up in the final race of the season and the championship could, in fact, be won or lost by one of either Bottas or Perez being sacrificed to go for a fastest lap, as we saw today. I mean, Red Bull played that one really well. They waited till the last possible moment to pit Perez, knowing that there was no chance Mercedes could react to give him a set of soft tyres, go out and do a qualifying lap. It obviously wasn't the smoothest lap by Perez, but he didn't have to be. He set purple sectors all the way around, got that fastest lap point. And as I said, we could end up in a situation at the end of the season where, they're level on points, Hamilton and Verstappen, for whatever reason. Perez comes into the pit lane, does a fastest lap to take the point off of Hamilton to give Max the win, or Bottas does the same for Lewis, vice versa. It could literally come down to that. I mean, it'd be amazing what Mercedes do if Bottas does it for them, given he's not going to be with them next season. But I imagine Red Bull will be very quick to get a brand new contract out for Perez if he does it for them, as he's only got another year following next season. But look, let's move on to the next part of the race. Of course, we had the first pit stops. Mercedes obviously doing a 1 lap undercut on Verstappen, which, got Lewis right within touching distance of Max, to the point where Max was saying on the radio, like, you can't allow Lewis to do that to me again, like undercut me, because we'll lose this race. And they were quite close together. Of course, Lewis was trying to get at Max on the harder tyres. It just wasn't really working for him at the time, biding his time. But then, of course, we'll fast forward to lap 40, I believe, where Max Verstappen, surprisingly, came in a little bit earlier than I expected for Red Bull forcing the undercut on Mercedes. Rick, were you surprised that Red Bull pitted Max a bit soon, or do you feel like it was the right call to try and preserve or protect Max from any undercut attempt from Mercedes?
When I see it happen, I thought Mercedes made the mistake by not putting Lewis in before Max. But in terms, it sort of worked wonders for them because their tyres were 3-lap fresher going into like the final part of the race, which allowed Lewis to put more pressure on Max because he knew he had that 3-lap advantage on them tyres. I think Red Bull thought if they bring him in now, it might panic Mercedes into putting Lewis in the next lap. But I think you got to look at the safety cars pretty much changed the sort of strategies a little bit in terms of when to bring the drivers in further along because you were sitting behind the safety car for about, I think it was like 3-4 laps at one stage. So it did sort of move the strategy a little bit another way and they sort of changed them up by bringing the drivers in earlier or later. But I think you heard Lewis on the radio when they asked him what if we were bringing you in again, what tyres would you want? And he obviously never said because he don't want Red Bull to find out or the commentators to know. And when he did come in, they didn't give him the tyres he wanted. He wanted mediums. But obviously the strategy worked by giving him the hard compound ones. And it paid off because Max just couldn't take the pressure of Lewis behind him for them sort of final 10, 15 laps. And it was just too much for him. Lewis got the speed and he overtook him pretty much with ease at the third attempt at doing it.
Well, this is a really good point, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I almost forgot about this part in the race where Lewis, of course, said he was going to select on his steering wheel what tyres he wanted to go on because, of course, crucially, he doesn't want to tell people on the radio because he knows it's broadcasted to the world. So we'd have found out, the commentary team would have found out, and more importantly, Red Bull would have found out. So they would have known how to react or what to do with Max Verstappen. I mean, I don't think if Mercedes had put Lewis on the medium tyres that Red Bull would have put Max on the medium tyres to react. I think they probably would have stuck with a harder compound, knowing that the tyres would most likely have struggled on Lewis's car towards the end of the race. It's weird how those sorts of things play out. I mean, we saw in the sprint race a similar distance to the end, Bottas making softs go all the way, Max on the mediums as well and everyone else. But in those sorts of conditions, you kind of have to play the hand you're dealt with. And given that we didn't really know too much about the performance of the harder compound tyres because hardly anybody ran them in the practice sessions this weekend. I think Aston Martin were the only ones that did, realistically. It was a bit of an unknown. But of course, on that second set of harder tyres, Lewis really was able to get up to Max Verstappen and really start to put pressure on him. And this is where the race really started to get interesting. Which brings us, of course, to lap 48, the big moment in the Grand Prix. The most controversial one ultimately didn't play a factor in the overall result. So obviously people aren't going to be worrying about it as much as they probably would have done if it had done. But I want to get your guys' thoughts on this one. Now, Max Verstappen, he's a very, very aggressive defender. Almost as aggressive as he is attacking. And we knew that with the history of these two this season, where they've both come together twice at Silverstone and at Monza, which has usually ended up in tears for at least one of them, there was always going to be the fear that it was going to be third time unlucky in this case. But fortunately, of course, Max went into the corner a little bit behind Lewis as Lewis overtook him down the straight. And both of them almost come together and both of them going wide at the first Juncal corner. I want to get your thoughts on this one. So, Luke, I'm going to come to you first. Do you think that Max Verstappen was a bit too aggressive and a bit over the line there? Or do you feel that the stewards were right in not to penalise Max Verstappen for his defending on Lewis Hamilton?
And this is where Rick's going to be a bit more controversial again. I think he's not going to listen, maybe agree with my opinion. I mean, I said at the start of the race, obviously with him and Bottas, I mean, the aggressiveness and it was fair. To be quite honest, when we saw it, I didn't think that there was much wrong, to be quite honest with you, when we first see it live. I felt from the angle that we saw it, we actually saw that Lewis obviously had the DRS and had that straight line advantage and got into that position. But we felt that he sort of overcut the corner. We didn't actually think that Max did that himself. But obviously when you see it, in the end of it, Max obviously goes across and, you know, in the end of it, sort of blocks Lewis off a little bit. I did sort of look at it another way where just before there was turned in towards that left after sector one, Max just pipped in front of him. But to be quite honest with you, I think Max slightly got away with it. I think when you look at it from a different angle, I don't think he necessarily tries to turn into Lewis, but I do think he's done enough to basically prevent Lewis from getting in front of him. And I think what he did, to be quite honest with you, I think was actually a little bit naughty, to be quite fair. The Bottas one, yeah, I think that was fine. But with that one with Lewis, I think you could understand probably why Max has done that. We have seen in the past that Lewis may be a bit more of a fairer driver, but, you know, the swings and roundabouts, Lewis has done his fair share in the past in championship battles with Rosberg and even Max this year as well. You know, I call it still 1-1, to be quite honest with you. I think Lewis was in the wrong at Silverstone and obviously Max was in the wrong at Monza. But yeah, I think Max was a little bit too aggressive, I think, and did get away with it. I think, you know, it's great that you can see the FIA radio, obviously, like Mercedes and Red Bull were moaning at the stewards, and, you know, Mercedes were trying to say, like, what, you can ram someone off the track, and Red Bull were trying to defend it, saying, oh, it's, you know, like Max just overcooked the corner because it was too dirty on that side. Whatever way you look at it, but for me, I think Max just slightly got away with it in the end, and it could have been another one of those Max and Lewis debates and penalties and whatever later on in the future. But fortunately, nothing happened, and we moved to the next one.
All the ingredients for a very peaceful transition of debate on social media. I'm certainly sure of that one. But yeah, of course, thankfully, it didn't end up with a collision with either of them. I think we should obviously stress, we're making these points on this particular incident. I'm sure loads of people listening to this will have their opinions, and please do put them in the comment section if you are watching this on YouTube. Incidentally, of course, if you are enjoying this content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It would really, really help us, as we're still trying to push for 500 subscribers, so we'd really appreciate your support on that one if you are watching us on YouTube. But of course, get your opinions in the comments. I want to know what you guys think about this incident. But we should stress, of course, that being in the UK, obviously we watch our coverage on Sky or on Channel 4 in particular, if people are watching it on there. So we don't have access to F1 TV like a lot of viewers around the world will have access. And of course, anyone that knows anything about F1 TV's package, you are able to see the onboard of the drivers of your choosing throughout the race, which of course you don't really get that option on more terrestrial broadcasting packages in certain countries specifically. And because of that, there was a lot of emphasis on Max Verstappen's steering input on the onboard camera. Now, of course, we didn't see that at all on the Sky F1 coverage. We only saw the overhead view, we saw the side views, we saw the original view, which looked like it was a fair move until we realised both of them were off the track. And it was only until the very end of it where it seemed that Max was too aggressive on that one, that he did go wide and tried to force Lewis too far wide. Originally, I thought that Lewis, like Max, was carrying a lot of speed into the corner, and that maybe neither of them would have made the corner anyway to complete the overtake, hence why I thought that's why Max got away with it. Perhaps that's what the stewards thought as well, hence why they didn't punish him for that defensive driving against Lewis Hamilton. Ricky, I know you've been patient and wanted to weigh in on this one, so I'm going to give you the floor. What did you think of that incident between Verstappen and Hamilton? And this one might be worthy of a clip, so I'm just going to hit record just in case.
I mean, if Max was called Lewis Hamilton, he would have been disqualified, 10-point deduction, starting at the bottom of the grid in the next race. Told he has to use someone else's car. I mean, it's... What else have you got to do to get a penalty in that instance? What you got to do, put him into the barricade? I mean, he pretty much put him off the track. He even come back on. You see the dirt just flash back up and Hamilton come back onto the track. And the last thing the FIA want to do is get on the wrong side of Toto Wolff, because you're lucky he never asked the question to the stewards about what happened. You can see how quick Red Bull got onto, it's let them race. Obviously, you're going to say let them race because your man was at fault. And then when they went to Lewis to say, there's going to be no interference, there's no looking at it. I mean, was he shocked? No, because let's be honest, he's Lewis Hamilton. They don't do anything for him. So I'm glad he won the race purely on the fact that the FIA tried to do him out of winning the race, basically.
Yeah. Very well put, I must say. I could see the restraint in your response there. For those of you not watching on YouTube, I think Ricky did really well. For anyone who's watched Ricky on his own podcast will know exactly what I'm talking about. So, yeah, I think you nailed that response there. So well done, Rick. I'm looking forward to more of that as this episode goes on. But you're absolutely right, Rick. Of course, it was for the sake, I suppose, of tranquility in this debate over was Max too aggressive or was the FIA right to not punish him, etc. The fact that Lewis won the Grand Prix has almost made this a bit more of a moot point, and it's more one of those that you can talk about with the freedom of knowing, well, it doesn't matter because Lewis still won the race anyway. I'm all for letting them race. I really am. And I can understand Red Bull putting forward their case. Of course they're going to. They're going to back their driver. In the same way Mercedes were saying, is that the standard now that we're accepting for defending, that you can just drive anybody off the road if they're trying to overtake you? Because those sorts of incidents can set a precedence if the FIA are going to judge it on a straight line basis or consistently like that. Because other drivers will see that and think, actually, Max was a bit too far there. Perhaps I can do the same thing. The same as the weaving side to side that Max was doing that got him a black and white flag later on when he was defending against Lewis. It wasn't Max's finest hour defensively. I've seen worse more aggressive defensive driving. I thought Max, when I first saw it, I thought that was as far as you possibly could go without getting a penalty. And it was really, really borderline. But the more I see it, the more I do agree that it does seem that Max was a bit too aggressive there. And perhaps he should have the second half of the corner, just continue to try and turn as much as possible. But then, of course, they'll argue the case that it was a bit dirty there, or there might have been an issue with the car or something that forced it. We saw a lot of that earlier in the race. So only they will know. Until we see that onboard footage. I mean, it might be available on social media. We haven't checked yet. So, yeah, in the end, they didn't, of course, give Max a penalty. They just said it was noted, and then they moved on. And then, of course, we fast forward, what was it, lap 57, lap 58? Lewis Hamilton went on the rampage again, went on the attack after Max Verstappen. This time, of course, completing the overtake brilliantly round the outside at the first part of Untitled with Max Verstappen, with no chance of Max being able to get back at him, which of course was followed by a huge eruption of cheers by the Brazilian fans, who I must say, I had no idea. Maybe this is my naivety, in terms of fan bases, but it's clear as day that the Brazilian fan base are massively in support of Lewis Hamilton, probably owing to the connection with Ayrton Senna, it must be said, but I mean, what a great support that they had for their man. Of course, got the job done. How impressed were you guys by that overtake by Hamilton? Were you worried that Max was going to try and get back at him, or did you feel, you know what, this is Lewis Hamilton at his absolute best?
I think you can clearly see that it doesn't. I mean, Lewis could be at the front of a race and can dominate it from start to finish, but you can also clearly see that it doesn't matter what position he's in. He's able to overtake. He's able to catch. Yes, he's got the fastest car. We know that. But at the end of the day, he's had one opportunity, and easily could have sort of sat back and thought, no, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to try something different. I mean, you can clearly see as well with that situation when he actually got the overtake done. He forced Max into a mistake, and not many times I've actually seen Max being sort of forced into a mistake this season by Lewis, because Max has been so good this year. And he done it a couple of times, didn't he, around turn one? He tried to make a little dive into turn one. And Max just sort of lost a bit of the line going into that corner, like losing a bit of speed out of that. So obviously Lewis was very clever to get him into that second part of the DRS zone. But, I mean, you can't take nothing away from him. I mean, what he's done today, I mean, I just can't believe how the crowd have got behind him so much. I mean, the guy who, see how you want to see it, sort of robbed Felipe Massa of a world championship. The Brazilian faithful, irrelevant of what you think of Timo Glock. I mean, I think Rick thought, I think your dad thought Timo Glock was a team, like more like a driver. But to be quite honest with you, I mean, love him or hate him. I mean, I'm not his biggest fan. I'll be quite honest with you. But as a driver, he is, by far one of the greatest. And the move he done today to win the race was fully deserved. And yeah, what else can you say? Like, Lewis Hamilton is a world-class driver, and he will continue to be. And he's definitely still got great chance to win this championship after that manoeuvre on Verstappen today.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. And the move he put on Sergio Perez and in the race, the one where obviously they swapped positions straight afterwards, but that was phenomenal how he got to slow down around the outside of turn one. The move he put on Lando Norris in the sprint race, again, we saw Lewis at his absolute best, throughout his entire career in F1. There are very few days where Lewis has been on the money, if you like, as much as he was this weekend, and he had to be. It was literally a do or die situation for him. He took so many risks and it paid off for him in the most brilliant way possible. So it was absolutely brilliant to see. Rick, of course, we should also mention the immediate reaction celebrating that in the Mercedes garage of Toto Wolff with probably one of the memes of the season, I'd imagine, as it will come out. But Toto, very defined, not sure what exactly he said. I think I put on the DNF1 page something like, I just wrote your mum on there as the caption. I'm sure other people will have plenty of other ones. But, well, what did you think of that reaction from Toto Wolff? Do you think that was about right?
What he was saying was, Christian Horner and the guy that was in charge of the officiating, I'll see you outside after, was pretty much what looked like he was suggesting. With regards to the overtake of Max, I don't even think that was the best one of the weekend. I mean, the best one of the weekend was what he did to Lando Norris in the sprint. And even Norris, when he was being interviewed, was just laughing and was like, what do you want me to do against someone that's basically an alien? Like, he's not from this planet, driving a car with that speed as well. But I love Toto Wolff. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm the biggest F1 fan, but Toto Wolff, I mean, fair play to whoever wants to get up with him and have an argument after a race in regards to officiating, moves on the track. But you just see the affection from Toto Wolff, that what they've gone through all weekend, the star man did the job and got it done.
Yeah. Go on.
I was just going to add one thing. I think you mentioned about, the overtake on Norris. For me, the most important overtake he's done this weekend was the one on Ricciardo in the sprint race. He was stuck behind him for about 4 to 5 laps, I think, before he got that job done. And that could have been a different, as we said about fine margins, didn't we, Adam and Rick? I think he stayed behind Ricciardo for about 3 to 4 laps. And if he'd have stayed a bit longer, he may not have finished 5th in that sprint race. And it could have potentially ruined a little bit of his weekend. I think he would have caught up to Max, but strategies could have been a bit more different. But I mean, as I said earlier, and as you've said, like, overtakes he's done this weekend, the one on Norwich is superb.
You say that. I remember in the sprint when the commentator was like, P6 is nowhere near going to be Hamilton getting there. And then he was up to P7. Then he hit P6 quickly, and the guy was pretty much, I'll stop talking, because he got P5 shortly after that. I just think the commentator just give up. Like, you can't commentate on greatness like that in that sprint. It was just unbelievable.
No, sometimes you just have to sit back and just acknowledge and appreciate what you are seeing is literally a master at work. All jokes aside, it's funny, Rick, you should mention on the Toto Wolff front, I agree, whilst I think some of the stuff that he was saying and complaining about did seem a bit like sour grapes. I mean, it's fine margins. It probably was harsh to get that disqualification, but I'm one of those people saying, well, look, you can complain about the treatment Red Bull got for their rear wing and stuff like that, but as Stefano Domenicali obviously looked like he had told him before the race, when they were having a conversation before Martin Brundle got up to him, and Toto was clearly not happy with what was said to him. Unfortunately for Mercedes, they've just been very unfortunate that being put in that position, but the rules are the rules. Red Bull obviously had similar checks, and as Ted Kravitz explained, that they passed their tests when they had to replace their parts and they followed the rules. Mercedes, unfortunately, are in a position where they didn't. So, it's one of those where they're not being accused of cheating. They didn't do nothing wrong, but it happens. I mean, the same thing happened to Vettel for Aston Martin at Hungary. They weren't cheating there. Something went wrong on the car, and it wasn't able to return a sufficient fuel sample, and he was disqualified for the race. So I suppose in hindsight, Mercedes should be glad, at least I suppose, that it happened in sprint qualifying, which gave Hamilton as much time as possible to recover and eventually, of course, win the Grand Prix rather than lose the race win for
in regards to that wing damage. So if it was fine before the sprint and during the sprint and it got damaged during the sprint, would you get punished if it was damaged during the sprint?
Well, the way it works, as far as I understand, is that when if there is damage and Mercedes are aware of it and they were able to report it at the time, then they can get some sort of exemption from this, but it still has to pass the necessary unless it's something ridiculous like the rear wing has just come off, something like that. But for something as minute as that, which obviously wasn't affecting Lewis's performance at all, that sort of thing can happen. And the argument will be is that, well, that under normal racing conditions where the car is safe to drive around, then Lewis should be driving a car that is robust enough to be able to not sustain enough damage to make it an illegal car. And it could be a faulty part or something like that. It was just one of those really unfortunate things where they didn't know about the damage until afterwards, until the scrutineering was done, and they put the gauge through. As I said, Ted throughout the weekend used that gauge to show people how much force they have to put through to make sure it doesn't go through. And they did it 4 times. They tested the car and it went through every time. I think the argument they were saying with Red Bull is that they had similar issues, and they were able to change their parts and there weren't any issues. But the thing was, Red Bull still passed the necessary tests with those damaged parts or those minute damaged parts. Whereas in this case, Mercedes didn't. As I said, look, one way or the other, I think, Mercedes will definitely feel hard done by about it, but those are the rules, unfortunately. I didn't write them, but they're there for a reason, because if we start making allowances for like the smallest things, then where does it stop? We're talking about a sport where the incredible men and women that that are the foundation of it and make it what it is will always look to extract the absolute most out of every finite amount that they can. So 2 millimeters or 0.2 millimeters or whatever it was, it can make a difference in the right hands. But anyway, look, I will ask you both actually on a tangent, because it's all about Toto Wolff. Obviously not the person you want to cross. We've asked a lot of our guests that have come on this show who would win a charity boxing match if there was one between Christian Horner and Toto Wolff. Now, of course, you two have featured in charity boxing yourself, so you'll know a little bit more about this than others will. But just that for fun, who do you think would win in a fight between the two of them?
God, Toto knocks him out within 2 seconds.
I don't think Christian Horner turns up.
Yeah, he might even step in the ring.
Well, he might do a David Hay and say he's broke his toe a couple of weeks before the fight.
Yeah.
He seems like he's one of them. He seems like he's one of them that will he whines and whines and whines and then goes tell someone else to go fight someone for him. He seems that type of person.
Be like the bad guy in one of those old games in the 90s where you fight the henchman, and if you get past him, you get him at the end. Yeah. But at this point, you're hoping the henchmen have done the job for you.
No one's beaten Toto Wolff anyway. I mean, he just looks like he could eat everyone on that.
Christian Horner's one of them. Remember the Shield broke up and he's like Seth Rollins, like he's the one that just sort of sits back and then he's got a couple of them to do the dirty work and then he jumps in after, like, to get a bit of the action. That'll be Christian Horner, I think. I don't think he goes 1v1 with Toto Wolff.
Oh, well, that'll be one for the WWE fans. But I think we're getting a little bit off topic now anyway. But look, let's get back to it, of course. Now, of course, Lewis makes the overtake. The stewards' inquiry or the FIA is completely irrelevant at this point now over the penalty with Max Verstappen. That didn't happen. And, of course, they end up going on to win the race and cross the line in brilliant fashion, of course. Not getting the fastest lap, but a healthy 25 points for Lewis Hamilton for a well-deserved performance. Obviously, the only downside is that he was so far back he couldn't do enough about that in the sprint race. But now it's reduced the gap to 14 points in the Drivers' Championship between the two. Given how good the performance was from Hamilton, how much speed he seems to have in that car right now, assuming that translates to the other circuits, do you believe he can win this World Championship? Or maybe, is he the favourite now to win this World Championship?
Oh, that's a good question. Can he win it? Yes, of course he can. Did I think if he wouldn't have won this race today, then I would have been saying today that Max has definitely got one hand on this championship. The thing is with the next race in Saudi Arabia, it's a new track for Qatar. It's a new track for everyone. Even though Mercedes will be quick in the straight lines, we know that, but it's going to take a bit of adjusting throughout practice. So we never know. Like as I said before, you never know with the sort of the way it could be going, because it could go either way. Who do I think is going to win the championship this year? I've said from day one, I feel Max is going to win it. And I'm still going to stick with my prediction. I still think Max Verstappen will win the championship. I think it will go into the final race of the season. I just feel that I don't think he's in a position now where he would feel under pressure as much as he's done before. I think he's now, you would sort of class him as a much more experienced driver, not like Lewis, of course, but I do feel that he's experienced enough in this position, and he's had a lot of races this season where he's been under a lot of pressure and he's been able to deal with it. So can Lewis win the championship? Yes, of course he can. Do I think he's going to win the championship? I feel Max is just going to nick it at the last race of the season.
Yeah, I'm just having a quick look on Twitter just to see if anything had come up. There actually is a little bit of an investigation regarding Lewis Hamilton, but don't worry, guys. It's nothing to do with the actual race. Apparently, on the in-lap of the following the race, Lewis, I don't know what's written here, but apparently there's an issue over Lewis Hamilton and the undoing of his seatbelt on the in-lap. Perhaps he... I think it was the moment where he was grabbing that Brazilian flag off the marshal.
Disqualify him.
No, he won't get disqualified. At least I don't think he will. No, I think Charles Leclerc had a similar issue in Spain last year where we undone it during the actual race, not after it had finished. So I think if I remember rightly, something similar to Mark Webber on his final race at Brazil when he took his seatbelts off, he's removed his helmet, and he got like a big fine or something like that, which obviously Red Bull paid because it was the last race of his career. So like Mark Webber didn't care. I'd imagine something like that will probably go Hamilton's way. But do you know what? I don't think they're going to care. I mean, could you imagine if the stewards did this and gave Hamilton a points penalty or another grid penalty or something stupid? It's not going to happen. But could you imagine?
I've just seen what the decision's been given. It's a €5,000 fine.
Oh no!
With a 20,000 suspended fine for 2022.
Game changer. What I mean, how is Lewis? He's going to have to take a paper round during the break the paper off.
And his pocket.
And I'm not being funny. We, all these, we get told that if we got a seatbelt off, that we could face points on our license or whatever like that. All Max done was touch someone's car, and he got a 50 grand fine. Toto
Wolff will make Christian Horner pay Lewis's fine.
What is his fee for the charity boxing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. One of the funny moments of the race that we should get into in a minute with Seb Vettel. But Ricky, obviously, what's your opinion on the battle for the championship now? Of course, 14 points between Lewis and Max. It did seem for a while that Max had one hand on the trophy, but after a win like today, has the momentum shifted in Lewis's favour?
I think Lewis wins the next 3 races.
Ooh.
I think he's just too quick. I think Mercedes have been very smart by changing that engine now. So it's if looking in terms of boxing, you got the championship rounds, and I think Mercedes have done the engine change in the championship rounds. No one cares about the first 10 races. It's all about the last 10, the last 5, and I think Mercedes have done the job by changing it now. They chose the weekend where they knew it's not the biggest of tracks. You got a few straights. You got that long straight from where they start and into the first corner. I just think he's going to have too much pace for Max over the next 3 races. And like Christian Horner said at the end of the race, Red Bull have never been in a situation like this. Normally, like Mercedes ain't either. Mercedes are normally well clear and the championship's done by now. So I think Mercedes being in it still gives them the edge because they've won titles. They know what it takes to win titles. And I just think Red Bull have not been in a position where this deep into it, so pressure might get to them. I just think Lewis is going to have too much for Max.
Yeah, very, very tight. And it's the same, of course, in the constructors now. I think it's 10.5 points between Mercedes and Red Bull. So there was a big swing, of course, at one point in the race where Verstappen was winning and Perez was third, or even second. Red Bull were going to be ahead of Mercedes. So it could go either way for either of them. And it's good to see. It looks like all 4 drivers are now really on form, whereas it was a case of Max and Lewis doing their own thing and Bottas and Perez were just anywhere. But now all 4 of them seem to be where they roughly should be on the circuit, respective of their performance in their cars. So that's only going to serve us well in the constructors as well. That could go either way. I'll be honest with you guys, after the American Grand Prix and the Mexican Grand Prix, I think I said on this podcast, I think Max has got this if he wins in Brazil. I think he will win the championship quite comfortably if he does it. The fact that Lewis performed so brilliantly, and perhaps under the circumstances as well, I think if Lewis had won the Grand Prix without that disqualification in the sprint race, won the sprint race and, of course, the race itself and got 29 points or whatever it was he would have got, I still probably would have felt Max had the advantage going into the other races, or at least would have been the favourite. The fact that Lewis has won the Brazilian Grand Prix in the manner he's had to this weekend and what he's had to do has completely turned my opinion on this. I think if the performance of Lewis is as good as it was today, or this weekend, I think we could be in for a hell of a finale where I think you got to go with a man that's been there and done it so many times. As brilliant as Max Verstappen has been, and as much as I still feel he's deserving of the title this season, it could come down to the last race, and if he doesn't get, the decision at the end or doesn't win the race, you can only put your hands up and feel sorry for him. But at the end of the day, no one's going to care because he didn't win it. He didn't win it, so we'll have to wait and see. It's tantalisingly close, and it could literally come down to the finest of margins, and I so hope it does. This season has been deserving of a finale like that. But let's talk about some of the other races, of course. We'll get into some other controversies a bit later on. But let's talk about Ferrari. We've talked a lot about Mercedes and Red Bull. I think we're like 50 minutes in or something like that before we've gone on to anyone else. And we do have to talk about some other teams. So we'll go through some of their races. Ferrari this weekend, all season long, they've had their big long battle with McLaren. It seemed like Ferrari had turned a corner from the Russian Grand Prix with the introduction of their electrical components being boosted in their engine power unit. We saw both drivers have that after the Turkish Grand Prix. But since then, Ferrari have been so good. And another strong 5th and 6th place, easily the best of the rest, and more crucially, an 18-point swing over McLaren once again, like in Mexico, owing to the 1 point they got in the sprint race with Carlos Sainz and the 5th and 6th for Leclerc and Sainz respectively. Luke, of course, now Ferrari have extended their lead in the Constructors' Championship ahead of McLaren now to, 31.5 points. Charles Leclerc now only 3 points behind Lando Norris. Amazing to see how they're so close now. And of course, Carlos Sainz not too far behind him. After what we've seen this weekend and the last couple of weekends, do you feel that McLaren have any chance of catching Ferrari up in this Constructors? Or do you feel that Ferrari perhaps may not only win the Constructors ahead of McLaren, but Leclerc and Sainz could beat Norris in the Drivers' Championship as well?
I didn't think that Norris would be so much under pressure from the start of the season he had. First half of the season, you would probably say Lando Norris was definitely the driver of the season so far. I think what he was achieving, he was so close to be getting, great. He got great results in itself, but the consistency that he showed was just excellent. And obviously the 1-2 in Monza, which I can't believe I'm right, Adam, it's still the only 1-2 this season out of any team on a Sunday race.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Bottas did complain about the strategy saying Mercedes could have got a 1-2 or they threw an easy one away this weekend. But so far, yeah, McLaren the only team with a 1-2 this season.
It's unbelievable. Even Red Bull haven't had one. Mercedes haven't had one, as you said. But I mean, just that 1-2, and then it fell apart in Russia. I mean, Norris. Rick said a few weeks ago after the right when we spoke off air about when Rick watched it and said about the experience of Mercedes when he brought Lewis in, obviously for that pit stop, and Norris stayed out. It just looks like he hasn't recovered. He was a bit unfortunate today. He obviously made a mistake, flipping with Sainz, and his race was done. It just looks like that Norris hasn't really recovered from that position that he was in at Russia. And it could affect him. And I do think Leclerc is the most consistent driver out of them all, I believe, apart from 1-2, if you would imagine Lewis and Max. But Charles Leclerc, for me, is a future world champion. He's definitely one of the best drivers on the grid. You can give him the slowest car and he'll still potentially find a way to score points. I think Leclerc will overtake him. Whether Sainz will, I don't know. Even though Sainz, again, was brilliant today, very consistent, again, getting more points for Ferrari. But Ferrari definitely are going to that right direction. And obviously for yourself, if you're a Ferrari fan, you're obviously liking that. But at the same time, it's looking good for 2022 for Ferrari, because this year they've been, especially second half of the season, they've been so consistent. They've been so, the team looks so much more balanced. Vettel and Leclerc, there was a little bit of a rivalry there. Leclerc was pushing Vettel, but even the days of Vettel and Raikkonen, you see there was a bit of a tussle there. But you can clearly see with Leclerc and Sainz, there's such a good team cohesion there. And I do feel that they're going to finish well and comfortably in front of McLaren in the championship of constructors. But it would not surprise me if Charles Leclerc does finish above Lando Norris in the championship.
Yeah, it does seem the way the form is going now, they're only so close together, and another weekend like we saw, and Leclerc will overtake Lando Norris. It's amazing considering how well Lando was driving at the start of the season. I mean, to his credit, I think this was his best weekend since Sochi. He was extremely unlucky. He did well in the sprint race. He got up to P5 ahead of Charles Leclerc. Took advantage of Leclerc being bogged down behind Perez and Sainz. And, Sainz did an incredible job this weekend for Ferrari, getting that P3 in the sprint race, making that soft tyre strategy work when Ferrari split the strategies on their cars. And, of course, another solid performance from him as well in P6. What's interesting, of course, is that these two seem to be fairly close together on track, Leclerc and Sainz. And, of course, we've seen on a few occasions this season where there was a worry that there might be a bit of an inter-team rivalry for supremacy, because Sainz is certainly not there to be Leclerc's wingman, if you like. And he's been very, very good and consistent as well. And we had a bit of a scary moment where Sainz was definitely defending on Leclerc at the beginning of the race, but of course Leclerc got the move done, and the two of them pretty much were following each other very, very closely. Ferrari stuck to the game plan, which was clearly a two-stopper on the mediums after the first stop, and they made it work for him really, really well. And again, it's another strong performance that Ferrari doing all the right things right now to make sure that they get this P3 in the Constructors' Championship, and they know that it's not fun for them to be comfortably behind Red Bull and Mercedes in this championship fight, but of course the bigger picture is 2022, where they'll be rejoining them sooner rather than later. I think F1 collectively hopes that they will, as to McLaren. Norris, of course, unfortunate this weekend owing to the performance in the sprint race. Wasn't going to get too much of a reward for P5 other than a good grid slot. But of course, that incident with Carlos Sainz at the start where the two of them touched, it did seem that Norris did move over onto Sainz a little bit, not that there was much room. But it completely ruined his weekend. And then, of course, you've got Ricciardo, who just seemed to be off the pace all weekend long. Rick, looking at this battle, do you think there's a chance for McLaren to get back into this? Or do you think Ferrari right now, with the car and the drivers driving the way they are, that perhaps this one could be done and dusted for the Scuderia?
Yeah, McLaren won't get near Ferrari now this season. The thing with the Ferrari boys is that they're both number one drivers. They're not a 1 and 2. And they're both strong individuals. They both want to dominate. So it sort of helps Ferrari out in the sense where they'll get maximum points, what they can get out of the two. Their car just seems a bit more powerful than McLaren at the minute. And with McLaren, that Lando Norris, he seemed like, in football terms, he's like a striker that ain't scored in 10 goals in 10 games. Since the incident with Hamilton, Hamilton pretty much destroyed his confidence that weekend by showing him how to drive and how to listen to your team and how to sit back and listen. But it's experience. Lando Norris was an experience. He got a bit excited that he was out in front, and sort of really turned his radio off in that race and not listen. But I just think Ferrari, seeing that they're coming on strong back into the season, and I think the majority put their everything into next season with the new cars and whatnot. And I think, if I make a bold statement, I think Ferrari will become the number 2 car next season with the new way it's going to go. And you can tell with Ferrari, they're not fighting against each other, the two drivers. They're on the same page, because as well as being competitive against each other, you could easily make a mistake and take your partner out of the race, but they don't do that. They know what to do, what the team orders are, and they get the points and bring them home.
Yeah, I mean, it's been rather close between them sometimes. We saw in Mexico a little bit where Leclerc was having issues owing to his strategy while his tyres were wearing a bit quicker. And there was obviously the frustration from Sainz. He wanted the cars to swap places earlier than they did. But they're both, in my opinion, I think they're doing a great job for the team. I think they've accepted the bigger picture here, and that their best way to beat McLaren in the second half of this season was to work together as best they can and just do the best job. And I think Ferrari are doing that. I think after Monza, I think it's kind of hit home for them that that's what they have to do, and they've done it to aplomb. And where McLaren have been struggling for one reason or another, whether their drivers are not in form or the car's not quite there, Ferrari have capitalised on it. It's almost been un-Ferrari-like. We haven't seen Ferrari like this for a long time, so it does bode well for next season if they've got the package, and a lot of people are saying that they could well have the package next season to challenge for the championship. They've certainly got the driver lineup that can certainly stake a bold claim, but it was certainly fun to find out, hopefully for their sake, they'll be on the money, as to our McLaren. I want to talk about Pierre Gasly briefly. Pierre Gasly qualified fantastically. I think it was P5 for the sprint race. Of course, he finished in P8 and then, of course, finished in P7 in the main race, of course. Clearly, Gasly was not on the pace of the Ferraris this weekend, as he brilliantly was ahead of them, well beating them in Mexico. But once again, another 6 points for the Constructors' Championship for AlphaTauri, and another weekend where Gasly's stock just continues to increase. What did you guys make of his weekend?
Gasly again was superb. I think, like, again, just ever consistent. Like I said about, the Ferrari boys the second half of the season. Gasly for me is, if you put the top 3 teams, or top 4 teams, if you include McLaren with Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, he's definitely the best driver out of them all. It's an interesting one with Pierre Gasly because, he'll be at AlphaTauri next year, and obviously his performances have been excellent and have been so consistent, and that's the reason why they are in the Constructors' Championship fighting alongside Alpine, and because Tsunoda's not really been at the races, to help his team out a little bit with the points, but it's going to be interesting to see where Pierre Gasly goes in 23, because I don't see him being an AlphaTauri driver for at least one more year next year. But the consistent performances that he's doing, I made a big, bold statement, and this might be a bit bold and a bit bizarre, but if Lewis decides to retire in 22, could Gasly be a potential replacement for Mercedes with Russell? It's always, it's a very bold prediction, but with his performances, I don't think he'll be back in a Red Bull car. I think Verstappen and Perez could be another couple of years. I don't think he'll be in a McLaren or a Ferrari, but Mercedes could be an option if Lewis does decide to think, right, if he's won 8 world championships and broke the record, what is there left for him to do? And you never know, like the new regulations, I know it might be a bit bizarre to say as well, but I think the new regulations might not suit certain drivers. And Gasly could be a potential replacement for a big team in 23. But again, going back to today, excellent performance. What else more can you say about Pierre Gasly? He's definitely up there as one of the top F1 drivers right now.
No, very, very true. And another strong performance from Pierre Gasly. Rick, what did you make of Gasly this weekend?
Yeah, he done well. He was strong. Put some challenges up, defended well. It don't help when your teammate looks like he's won the raffle to get to drive an F1 car for the weekend. Absolutely shocking he was. He nearly wiped himself out, and I can't remember who he took it out as well. Was it one of the Aston Martin?
Yeah, it was Lance Stroll.
Yeah, might as well put me in the car. I could do the same job as what he done today, really.
You're about the same height, aren't you? So you should be all right.
Yeah,
he's a little bit lighter.
The commentator used that he was a young driver as an excuse. You're in F1, you get paid well, you're in top motorsport, and you drive like that. But Gasly done well. Like Luke said, he deserves to be at somewhere a level above what he's at. I can't see Hamilton retiring after he wins at 8th. I just think, why retire when you're getting paid so much money, you're dominating? I think Mercedes would be too much of a step up for him. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see where he goes after next season.
I think the only option, I just use Mercedes as an example. I personally don't think he'll go there, but it's always in the Mercedes mind, maybe, because there's not really. You could potentially look at Norris possibly if he's not at McLaren still, but I don't know. The only other team had them probably Alpine because of the French connection. Maybe I know Ocon's there, but Alonso steps aside. They may want the full French team at that team.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Lewis isn't going anywhere till 2023, where a lot of people believe that probably will be when he hangs up his helmet and gloves for good, because of course he wants to concentrate on his other ventures that he's very heavily involved in at the moment. But we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, you're right on Tsunoda, Rick. I think he qualified well this weekend, but then sprint qualifying, he went a bit further down, and in the race, he completely ruined it for himself. He thought Stroll turned in on him. You can't throw the car in like that at turn 1 when you're nowhere near alongside him and expect to not get hit the way that he did. And he wrecked Stroll's race as well. So, yeah, it wasn't the best day for Tsunoda, really, when he needs to be putting those performances together. He seems to have some really good weekends, and then he ends up damaging his reputation with a silly overtake like that. Young driver or not, you can't really be going for those kind of moves and expecting not to come out with your car intact. we should also spare a thought for Sebastian Vettel this weekend because he drove incredibly well, in my opinion. I think the strategy, the Aston Martin strategy really done him in. I mean, he finished 10th in the sprint race and he was doing rather well. He was running in the top 6 early on in the race until Lewis Hamilton got in, putting a few good overtakes in the race. But the strategy went for the 2-stopper, didn't really work out for him, ended up in P11, whereas obviously Norris got back ahead of him. But then the 2 Alpine guys, and Ocon and Alonso, managed to get into P8 and P9, making the 1-stopper work. So, yeah, it was quite a good weekend for Alpine, all things considered. They matched AlphaTauri, so they're still level on the constructors for 5th place between the two of them. But it's good for Alpine to make that 1-stop work between them and get some crucial points in this championship.
To show how good, what driver they've got in the team. I mean, they've got 2 race winners in there now. I mean, Esteban Ocon done a good job this weekend. Again, another driver, I think, maybe not the level of Gasly in my opinion, but again, another solid drive from Ocon that goes under the radar a little bit. Doesn't really get as much sort of praise as he should do because I think he's been under a lot of pressure, especially after he won in Budapest, because you win a Grand Prix and you're not expecting him to win another one with the car he's got, but he's been putting in some good performances, Ocon, recently. And I mean, what else can you say about Fernando Alonso? Just for me, he's probably the second best driver in the grid behind Hamilton. He's just so good. I mean, it gets better with age, like what he can do with a certain car. And again, making a 1-stopper work around Sao Paulo, which is difficult, especially with that heat today. What a job Alpine have done, and deservedly got their points that they got.
Yeah, very much so. We'll move on to some of the final few stories for the rest of the teams. Alfa Romeo, of course, Kimi Raikkonen P12, Giovinazzi in P14. We should say a special praise to Kimi Raikkonen, despite a difficult moment with Mick Schumacher, which wasn't Kimi's fault. I think we can agree Mick Schumacher messed up on that one, but Kimi starting the race, I believe, from the pit lane because he had to change something on his rear wing of his car. Ended up in P12 nonetheless, so no, good job from him. Williams, of course, George Russell. First time George Russell has lost to a Williams teammate in conventional qualifying, or a conventional qualifying format, with Latifi out-qualifying him in the sprint qualifying session. So clearly Latifi was sick and tired of being beaten 35 times in a row in qualifying, thought, you're not going to beat me one more time. And final story on Haas, of course, Mick Schumacher, as we said already, damaging his front wing. And we'll get to where Ricky's laughing in a minute. I'll give him the floor on this one.
For Rick.
But this is his moment. This is his time to shine. I'm going to give it to him in just a moment. But yeah, Mick Schumacher making a costly mistake there with Raikkonen. It wasn't really entirely his fault. He just made a little mistake. The car got stepped out on him, and it just ended up sending him into Raikkonen, which caused him to lose his front wing, which caused him to finish dead last of all the runners. Of course, we had 2 retirements, Ricciardo and Stroll. Stroll, of course, retiring to the eventual damage caused by Tsunoda, and Ricciardo with engine issues, which could be an issue for Mercedes for the final races. We'll have to keep an eye on that one. But Rick, of course, your favourite driver on the grid, Nikita Mazepin, beating his teammate this weekend, but something tells me that you're not not as much of a fan of his as I originally thought.
Pure vibes, he is, isn't he? I mean...
Mazepin.
It's not even that. Do you know what? It seems like, you get that party lad that's always involved. Have you seen in between us when you got the guy, that Richard guy? Like, that's him. I mean, how was he an F1 driver? I mean, again, I'll go back to winning raffle tickets and winning. He gets to be a driver. Apparently, he's financially backed.
Well, yeah, he's bought all the raffle tickets in the raffle, and he's surprised that he's won. So there you go.
And he gave the others the Lance Stroll.
It's how, like, he goes to every weekend. He gets beat up and bullied every weekend, but he comes out probably the richest one out the lot. I'd love to meet him, and I'd love to ask him the question, why are you an F1 driver? There's got to be something out there that's better suited to you, mate.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, he was having a bit of a scuffle in a nightclub. Apparently, he was helping a friend, but the video footage looked like he was having an argument with the bouncers or something. I don't know.
Do you know who he reminds me of? Who's the guy, the ex-army guy with a massive beard that just goes partying with all these girls on a boat? That is him. I'm telling you now. What is it? Dan Blitzerian.
Dan Blitzerian, yeah.
He's Dan Blitzerian, I'm telling you.
I think that's
he's just there for pure vibes. Pure vibes.
I think it's a bit of a compliment to Mazepin, isn't it?
It's like he's Newcastle.
Oh, God.
Financially backed, but gets battered every week.
He's behind Kubica in the championship still.
I'd have to check that, to be fair.
I think Mick Schumacher felt sorry for him and thought, there you go, you can beat me this time.
I mean, I'm pretty sure Kubica is above Mazepin in the championship. And I think Kubica's done what? 2 races?
There can't be someone
He is.
bottom of the list more than him.
I don't know what finish. I'll have to have a look. His best finish.
He must have had a high finish somewhere. Like
I'll have to look.
Like
I'll have to dig it out.
He seems one that could pay the officials off just to get an extra place.
Would you reckon he's a Verstappen fan and he's paid them off to try and penalise Lewis as much as possible? I mean, look, I'm trying to be impartial as much, but
Total Wolf needs to get him in the Mercedes when Lewis retires.
We see it in Spain, didn't we? When it on the radio, like Total Wolf was shouting, "Get Mazepin out of the way." I think that was the first time we ever saw FIA radio with the teams, and Total Wolf just come out all guns blazing and with Mazepin, just get out of the way. Literally, it was just.
Do you reckon Mazepin and the AlphaTauri guy, what's his name?
Sonoda.
Yeah, do you reckon them two just chill and vibe at the weekend together, thinking, what can we do this week?
I highly doubt it, but it's an interesting thought. Look, we're getting off topic. I think we're going to round this up because we've been going on for quite a while on this one. So, final thoughts on this weekend from both of you before we plug your socials and your podcast, of course.
Mazepin's a legend.
I mean,
Lewis
on the actual,
GOAT.
yeah, there you go. That's what I was hoping for, Rick. Lewis is the GOAT. Yeah, but sounds on basis of what we saw this weekend. There's certainly no arguments to that. Luke, serious final thought this weekend?
Bring on the next race. I think it's. It's been the best championship that I've watched since the. Probably you got to go back to. I mean, Hamilton and the lineal champion Rosberg, but obviously at the same time you've got. The battles we've had over the years, Schumacher, Alonso, Schumacher, Hakkinen, as Rick would know, like back in the 97, 98 and whatever. But no, I mean, all seriousness, bring on the next race. What a championship it's been. And let's go
Super match is done, mate.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Based on what we saw this weekend, the championship is certainly far from over, with 3 more Grand Prix left to go, going to Qatar next week. And of course, we'll have to wait and see if we're going to go to Jeddah. It just doesn't seem like the track's going to be ready in time, but Michael Massey is adamant that it's going to be ready in time to host an F1 Grand Prix. We'll just have to wait and see. Only 3 weeks to go.
Have you seen pictures?
I've seen pictures. It looks, yeah. It doesn't
taking a straight out.
It looks like it would struggle to be ready in 3 months, let alone 3 weeks. So we'll have to wait and see. It looks like a COD map at this point, an unfinished one at that. So I'll leave that there. And of course, the finale, Abu Dhabi, where of course the track changes have been complete. So we'll have to wait and see how that turns out as well. It could be very, very decisive. And of course, will the track changes change who fancies the track better between the Merc and the Red Bull? We'll have to wait and see. But guys, before we round this off, of course, I'm going to give you the floor to plug your socials and plug your podcast. Let our followers know where they can find you and what you guys are all about.
Thanks for letting me come on, Adam. Fortunately, Courtney weren't on tonight because he'd be mugging us off about West Ham Liverpool from last week.
I think he'd be in a very good mood considering how this weekend has gone as well. I've literally been buzzing my phone, messaging me about Lewis. So,
obviously, thanks for letting us come on. We are the 1892 Reds podcast. We are on YouTube. Just obviously search 1892 Reds podcast and that. We're also on Twitter. We're on Instagram as well. Come and check us out. Hit the subscribe button when you come over and don't unsubscribe. Please, obviously, subscribe to our channel. And we shall be, I think we're doing a video on Wednesday and Thursday for our Arsenal preview. So we'll have to get you on, Adam. Have to have a bit of banter about football.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. Arsenal, Liverpool. We're doing better, but we'll have to wait and see if Liverpool away might not necessarily be the happiest of hunting grounds for us. We'll have to wait and see. But of course, we'll talk about that on another podcast at another time. But as Luke said, guys, of course, 1892 Reds podcast, Liverpool Football Club podcast. Of course, if you enjoy your football or Liverpool Football Club in particular, or if you're not and you just like to see Liverpool fans have a little bit of a rage and a moan and a laugh, go check these guys out. Great stuff they do. Yeah, Ricky especially. That's why I wanted to get him on here. Try and cross it over into F1. He's certainly delivered. But of course, you can check them out on their social media as well. We will leave a link and description to their channel and their socials as well to check them out. But thanks for coming on the show, guys. Really appreciate you lending your insight, and it was a lot of fun. But of course, guys, until next time, we have been DNF1, and please do stay safe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast.